Hey, my friends, we're talking about Matthew 18, not just in general. We're talking about that Matthew 18, verses 15 through 17, the part that talks about what you're supposed to do when a relationship with somebody gets busted up, somebody sins against somebody else, you're trying to deal with things in another person's life, within the church, within the family of faith that is screwy, destructive, even sinful. And it's not as simple as just follow these 3 steps, because all 3 of those steps have pretty big implications, but also maybe it is just as simple as follow these 3 steps. Whatever the case, let's pick up where we left off yesterday and keep working it through. So behind each of these overt steps that Jesus is putting in place to govern conflict resolution and even overt sinful behavior in the community of faith, behind each of these, there's the implicit assumption of humility on the part of the individual. Implicit assumption number 1 is, if somebody sins against you, you don't actually have to go and work that out. You can just take it and forgive them and move on and chalk it up to a bad day, and that's that. Implicit assumption number 2 is that both parties want to get it right, and implicit assumption number 3 is that those 2 or 3 witnesses will just tell the truth and everyone will be loyal to whatever the truth is, and that the moral right way, healing way to respond to whatever it is that went down will be evident once the facts are in place, which takes us to step 3 in verse 17. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church, and if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Well, yikes, that ends rough. We'll get to that in a minute. So now, the implicit assumption behind the text is, no, we got a belligerent here. This person is not bought into the values of the kingdom. This person does not care about the factual testimony of other people who saw what went down. They don't care about the correction of other brothers and sisters. They're running their own equation here. They're doing their own thing, and they don't want to listen to this correction or this pushback. And at that point, you're into nuclear option. And this is the nuclear option. It sounds so cute and sweet and harmless on paper. Like, well, just go alone and ask about it and try and get it worked out. Oh, that didn't work? Well, bring a couple friends along and see if you can get it worked out. Well, that didn't work. I guess you'd have to talk to the church about it. Hey, have you ever had to do that, though? At your job, at your school, at your church? It sucks. I've had to do it a few times, and I think I was right, but I don't know. I bet some people who have disagreed with me over that are listening right now, and you're thinking to yourself, no, I remember when you were in that position where you had to walk through these steps, and maybe you usually got those right, but I can think of that time that you didn't get it right, or maybe that time that I think you didn't get it right. It's messy. It's tough. If it makes it to phase 3 and you're a part of that decision to take it to phase 3, you're taking that with you forever. It will never go away. It doesn't matter how wrong or bad you think somebody else's behavior was. You will be humbled by that experience. It will point a finger right back at you, because automatically, if you're willing to take it to the church, it means you better be ready to get scrutinized on all the same stuff. It harkens back to the first big speech around which the entire book of Matthew is built, the one where Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, like, hey, whatever measure you use, it's going to be used on you. That isn't just a spiritual truth. That's a reality truth. The law of don't be a hypocrite means that if you take this to this level, you better be dang sure. And if you're not dang sure, or if you lack the credibility or rightness or humility in your own life to do that, get ready to take a beating too in the name of what is good. And that's part of why this step is so hard, because who is good enough to really bring stuff like this up against someone, even if they are being belligerent, even if they are dead wrong? This is heartache in a bottle. And to act like it's just this neat, simple little formula, and you just simply do exactly the thing here. If you can say that, you haven't been through this. And to every one of you who's on the other side of this conversation, who's gone through a broken relationship in an institutional setting, or maybe even, no, not maybe, and definitely most of all in a church setting, I am sorry for the never going away hurt that will only be resolved in the full realization of the kingdom and the full presence of God, because in the meantime, we can try all we want to put on a brave face and be like, I stand behind that. But the reality is, it hurts, because you got sideways with Christians. You got sideways with maybe even people who weren't Christians and didn't ever mean any of this stuff, and they were just trying to exploit the community. But still, you had to put yourself out there. All of your business had to be scrutinized, and you were a part of something where you were in this horribly uncomfortable place of publicly confronting something that just could not be allowed to stand and putting your name next to it. And there is a pain and a weight and a burden that comes with that. There is also a blessing that comes with that, because the kingdom is valuable, because the church is valuable, because these little children are valuable. And if you're in a place where in some way it's your job, your role, voluntarily or in a vocational way, to try to do something about something that went sideways in church, well, you only need to scroll back to the previous 14 verses of chapter 18 to realize that it's a very meaningful job and it needs to be done. And God wants somebody to do it. And he values the victims. He values the people who were wronged or are being wronged by whoever is sinning, to just use Jesus' word. He values them profoundly. And there are stern warnings for people who would wrong those little children. And so not too much of a stretch to imagine that there's the strong expectation that if one is in a position in church, in a relationship setting, where somebody else is doing something overtly destructive that just cannot stand, somebody needs to do something about it. But lest we become down and discouraged over that burden, over the ick of this otherwise beautiful, transcendent, almost utopian thing being sullied by interpersonal conflict and having to resolve that sometimes even in front of the whole church, lest we become discouraged by that, the next 3 verses, which unfortunately are often mentally separated from the passage we're looking at right now, these 3 steps, these next 3 verses provide tremendous encouragement that indicate that Jesus understands the burden of what this thing he just instructed us to do looks like, and that offers the reassurance that if you have to go through this with those 1 or 2 others you take along with you, even just that many people, doing this very difficult process the right way in his name, he reminds us in verse 20, even promises in verse 20, that where those 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, there he is with us, or there I am with them is how he exactly says it. Another unspoken expectation of this text that I think is easy to overlook, though, is that if you want to be the kind of person who does the family of faith life the way Jesus is prescribing, you also have to let people take you through this process. You can't deny someone else these steps for any reason, because otherwise you give them no recourse to try to do things the right way. If you deprive them of that, then you're forcing them to either let it go before the situation is resolved or dealt with, which isn't a fair expectation, or you're forcing them outside the boundaries of what this allows. You're forcing them to go and do things out of process, to do things that are weird or even inappropriate and wrong themselves. You force them to go about resolving the thing in a way that is guaranteed to wreck it completely. So as hard as it is, if you think the other person is wrong, it would seem that what Jesus is teaching here is you still have to let them walk through this thing all the way to the very end. I say again, even though these instructions look very simple, it is very difficult, but also when you think about it from all of these different angles and you think about the alternatives to this, it's genius. It is a gift from Jesus to his followers who would come after him. I understand that we're lingering on this passage a little bit, and we are definitely being slowed down by the fact that I am grappling with it myself. This is both a very simple and very difficult passage in terms of execution and implications, and I've got a few more things I want to process through with you tomorrow. So we're going to pause again and stretch the conversation out one more day. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.